She was a doctor, and for 8 years of marriage, she carried one painful truth alone. Her husband was infertile. She protected his pride, accepted a life without children, and buried her own quiet heartbreak. But on their 8th wedding anniversary, inside the hospital where she worked, she heard him cry out desperately, "Please, save my wife and my child." In that instant, everything stopped. Child. Her heart dropped as the reality unfolded. He had known, he had lied, and he had betrayed her. She stood frozen as the truth hit her with a force she never expected. "Hi, my beautiful family, may the Almighty place a divine light in every woman's soul. A light that never dies, a strength that never bends. May He ease her burdens, soothe her silent tears, and surround her with love that protects, heals, and honors her. May every woman walk with her head high, knowing she is a pillar of grace, the warmth of home, and the heartbeat of every family. She deserves gentleness, respect, and a love that stands beside her, always. And may every home in our family be blessed with peace that stays, joy that grows, and success that follows your steps wherever you go. May your health remain strong, your heart stay calm, and your days open like flowers toward the light. You are loved deeply by God and by me. If your heart is true, like the video, if your love is real, right, I am with Mr. Peter. Some truths arrive quietly, like snow accumulating on a windowsill. Others detonate inside your chest with such violence that the world splits into before and after. Samantha Grant had carried her husband's secret for 8 years, protecting it like a fragile bird cupped between her palms, never knowing that the entire time she was cradling a lie so monstrous it would eventually devour everything she believed about her life. The surgery had gone flawlessly. Samantha peeled off her gloves in the scrub room, watching the water spiral down the drain as her colleague Jennifer Ashford burst through the door with the kind of breathless excitement that made Samantha's stomach tighten before she even heard the words, "I'm pregnant." Jennifer squealed, grabbing Samantha's shoulders and bouncing like a teenager. 12 weeks today and I just got the ultrasound and everything looks perfect and oh my God, Samantha, I'm having a baby. Samantha manufactured a smile that felt like broken glass in her mouth. She pulled Jennifer into a hug, said all the right things, asked about due dates and nursery colors, while something inside her quietly bled out onto the pristine tile floor. 8 years. 8 years of watching other women glow with life growing inside them, while her own womb remained an empty cathedral. 8 years of believing that her husband Donald was infertile, that his low sperm count made pregnancy impossible, that she had sacrificed motherhood on the altar of his masculine pride, because loving him meant protecting his dignity. "You'll make an incredible mother," Samantha said, releasing Jennifer from the embrace and forcing brightness into her voice. "That baby is already so lucky." Jennifer grabbed her hands, eyes shining with sympathy that made Samantha want to scream. "Maybe you and Donald should try those new fertility treatments everyone's talking about. I know someone who—" "We're fine," Samantha interrupted gently, the lie sliding out smooth and practiced after years of repetition. "Really, we've made peace with our situation. Peace, what a civilized word for the slow death of dreams. What a polite way to describe lying awake at night, wondering what her children would have looked like, what their laughter would have sounded like, echoing through the house that stayed perpetually, achingly quiet." Samantha left the scrub room and walked through the corridors of Riverside Medical Center with the mechanical precision of someone who had navigated these hallways for a decade. She was one of the best diagnosticians in the state, the doctor other doctors called when cases became impossibly tangled. Her reputation was built on seeing patterns others missed, on connecting symptoms that seemed unrelated, on solving medical mysteries with the kind of intuitive brilliance that couldn't be taught. But she had missed the biggest diagnosis of her life, hadn't she? She had believed her husband. She had trusted his sorrow when he showed her the test results. his quiet devastation when specialists confirmed what he claimed was his failing, his gratitude when she told him it didn't matter, that she loved him more than any hypothetical future children. She had been such a fool. The scream came from the direction of the labor and delivery unit, a sound so raw and desperate it stopped every person in the corridor mid-step. Samantha froze, her heart suddenly hammering against her ribs because she knew that voice. She knew it the way you know your own breathing, the particular cadence and pitch that belongs to only one person in the entire world. Donald. She started running before her brain fully processed the decision, her white coat billowing behind her as she sprinted toward the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the nurse's station, people forming a concerned circle around something she couldn't yet see. Samantha pushed through bodies, her credentials and authority parting the group like a knife through fabric. And then she saw him. Donald Simon, her husband of 8 years, was on his knees in the middle of the hallway, tears streaming down his face, his hands clutching the arm of a young nurse who looked terrified by the intensity of his grief. He was sobbing with the kind of abandon that comes when control has shattered completely, his whole body shaking with each ragged breath. "Please," he gasped, his voice breaking on the word. "Please, you have to save them both. My wife," he choked on another sob, pressing his forehead against the nurse's hand. "My wife and my child, I can't lose them, I can't. Please tell me they're going to be okay." The world tilted sideways. Wife. Child. The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into Samantha's lungs with each shallow breath. She stood completely still while everything inside her began to collapse, each word landing like hammer blows against her chest. Wife, child. The corridor stretched and warped around her, sound becoming muffled and distant, her vision narrowing to just Donald's anguished face as he begged strangers to save people who shouldn't exist. "Sir, we need you to calm down," the nurse was saying, her voice professional but strained. "The doctors are doing everything they can. Your wife is in excellent hands, and she's been in labor for 18 hours. Donald interrupted, his voice climbing toward hysteria. 18 hours and something's wrong. I know something's wrong. And if anything happens to her or the baby, I don't know what I'll do." "I don't." Samantha's legs carried her forward without conscious instruction. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her face a mask of surgical calm that concealed the screaming chaos beneath her skin. She was a doctor. She was a professional. She could deliver a baby even while her entire existence crumbled into dust. "I'll check on the patient," she heard herself say, her voice steady and clinical and completely unrecognizable. "Which room?" The nurse looked up at her with relief flooding her features. "Room 7, Dr. Grant. Thank God you're here. It's her first baby and the labor's been complicated and—" Samantha didn't hear the rest. She was already walking toward room 7 with measured steps, her heart beating so loudly in her ears it drowned out everything else. Behind her, she could hear Donald still sobbing, could hear him calling after her with desperate gratitude, could hear him saying her name like she was his salvation, instead of the woman whose life he had just obliterated in a hospital hallway. The door to room 7 stood partially open. Through the gap, Samantha could hear the sound of labored breathing, the steady beep of monitors, the low murmur of medical staff coordinating. She placed her hand against the door and felt the cool metal beneath her palm, felt the last seconds of her old life ticking away like a countdown to detonation. Then she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The woman in the bed was young and beautiful in the way that survival shows on a face, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her hands gripping the rails as another contraction seized her body. She cried out, a sound of pure animal pain, and the nurse beside her murmured encouragement while checking the monitors. But Samantha barely registered any of that. Her eyes had locked onto the other figure in the room, the man standing at the bedside holding the laboring woman's hand, his face twisted with concern and love and fear. Donald. He looked up, as Samantha entered, and in the split second before recognition crashed over his features, she saw him as he truly was. Not her husband, not the man she had protected and comforted and sacrificed for, just a stranger wearing a familiar face. A liar whose deception had been so complete she had never suspected, never questioned, never imagined that while she mourned the children, they would never have. He was creating a whole separate life where those children existed. Their eyes met across the chaos of the delivery room. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his mouth open in a silent scream of horror as he realized what had just happened. How his carefully constructed double existence had just imploded in the one place where both worlds collided. She watched him try to speak, watched words die in his throat, watched 8 years of lies catch up to him in a single, devastating moment. Samantha turned to the woman in the bed, who was staring at her with confused desperation, and smiled with a serenity that came from some distant, frozen place inside her soul. "Hello?" she said calmly, moving toward the bed with professional efficiency. "I'm Dr. Grant. I'm going to help you deliver your baby." Behind her, she heard Donald make a sound like a wounded animal. She didn't turn around. She focused on the woman screaming in labor, on the monitors showing fetal distress, on the medical emergency that required her expertise, because that was something she could control. That was something she could fix, unlike her marriage. Unlike her life, unlike the trust that had just shattered so completely, there was nothing left but jagged edges and blood. Chapter 2. The Architect of Deception. Samantha delivered the baby with hands that refused to tremble. She guided the screaming infant into existence with mechanical precision, every movement automatic from years of training that didn't require conscious thought. The baby boy emerged healthy and loud, his first wail piercing the delivery room with life's announcement. She clamped the umbilical cord and placed him on Bridget's chest, while everyone around her celebrated the miracle she'd just facilitated. "He's beautiful," Bridget sobbed, her hands shaking as she touched her son's tiny face. "Oh God, he's absolutely beautiful." Donald was weeping too, collapsed over the bed with his face buried in Bridget's hair, whispering words Samantha refused to process. She stepped back from the intimate tableau they created, this family unit that existed because of lies piled on top of lies piled on top of theft. She stripped off her gloves with deliberate slowness and made notations on the chart with handwriting that remained perfectly legible despite the chaos screaming inside her skull. Baby boy, 3.2 kilograms. APGAR scores excellent. Mother stable. Father present. Just another routine delivery in a career spanning thousands of births, except this one had detonated her entire existence. "Dr. Grant," Bridget said, her voice thick with exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved us both." Samantha looked at her directly, really studied the woman who'd been sharing her husband for 6 years without knowing it. Bridget was young, maybe early 30s, with the kind of natural beauty that required no enhancement. Her eyes held no malice or triumph, just raw maternal love and the vulnerability of someone who'd just endured 18 hours of labor. Whatever Donald had told her, it clearly wasn't the truth about still being married. "Congratulations on your son," Samantha said, her voice perfectly modulated and utterly empty. "You did beautifully." She walked out of the delivery room before anyone could respond. The corridor stretched ahead of her like a tunnel. Fluorescent lights too bright, voices too loud, the whole hospital suddenly feeling like a cage she needed to escape. Donald burst out of the room behind her, calling her name with escalating desperation. "Sam!" "Samantha, please. Wait, just wait, let me explain." She kept walking, measured strides, professional composure. The chief of diagnostic medicine leaving after a successful delivery, nothing unusual. Nothing worth noting except for the husband chasing her down the hallway like some desperate animal. "Samantha, please." His voice cracked on her name. "I know what this looks like, but you have to understand. It's not, I never meant—" She stopped so abruptly he nearly collided with her. Turned to face him with eyes so cold, he actually stepped back. "Go back to your wife and your child," she said quietly. "I have other patients to attend to." "You're my wife," he said desperately. "Sam, you're my wife. She's just—" "Security," Samantha said clearly, and two guards appeared from their station near the elevators. "This man is disrupting hospital operations. Please escort him back to the maternity ward." Donald's face went sheet white as the guards took his arms. "Sam, no, please, I just need 5 minutes. I can explain everything if you just—" But she was already walking away, disappearing around a corner while his pleas echoed behind her like the death rattle of everything they'd been. She made it to her office before the shaking started, locked the door, sat in her chair, stared at her hands that had just delivered her husband's baby with another woman, and wondered distantly if she was having some kind of psychotic break. Her phone buzzed, 37 missed calls from Donald. She blocked his number with 3 taps and watched his contact information disappear from her screen like he was being erased from existence. Samantha drove home through afternoon traffic, autopilot guiding her while her mind spun through calculations and probabilities. The house appeared in her windshield exactly as she'd left it that morning, pretty and suburban and completely false. She parked carefully, walked inside, poured wine from the bottle Donald had purchased for their anniversary celebration last month. 8 years. 8 years of anniversary celebrations and holiday dinners and weekend mornings tangled in bed. 8 years of believing she knew the man sleeping beside her. 8 years of being so profoundly, spectacularly wrong. She carried her wine to Donald's study, the room she rarely entered, because he'd always claimed he needed private space for creative work, and she'd respected those boundaries like a fool. The door opened easily. No lock. Why would there be? She was the trusting wife who believed in privacy and autonomy and all those civilized concepts that apparently only applied to people who weren't running elaborate cons. His laptop sat on the desk, closed but not protected. Samantha opened it and found no password required because Donald was cocky enough to think he'd never get caught. She began clicking through folders and files, each discovery adding another layer to a betrayal so comprehensive it would have impressed her if she weren't the victim. Bank statements showed systematic transfers to accounts she'd never heard of. Email folders revealed correspondence with Bridget spanning 6 years. Photo libraries contained hundreds of images documenting their relationship. Donald and Bridget at restaurants. Donald and Bridget on beaches. Donald and Bridget looking at each other with easy affection, while Samantha sat at home, believing herself married to an honest man. She found the condo he'd purchased under his cousin's name. Found receipts for jewelry she'd never seen. Found vacation bookings for trips he'd claimed were work conferences. The documentation was staggering. He hadn't just cheated. He'd created an entire parallel existence with infrastructure and financial planning and consistent maintenance across years. The real devastation emerged from the spreadsheets. Donald kept meticulous records, tracking every dollar spent on his secret life. Samantha opened file after file, her diagnostic brain calculating automatically, assembling the numbers into a conclusion that made her stomach turn viciously. $240,000. That's how much he'd stolen from their joint accounts over 6 years. Roughly $3,000 monthly, sometimes more during holidays or special occasions. Money from her salary, from her bonuses, from the shared savings they'd built for their future. Money that had funded vacations and jewelry and rent for the condo where he played house with Bridget, while Samantha worked 60-hour weeks and mourned the children they supposedly couldn't have. Her phone rang. Octavia's name flashed on the screen like a lifeline. "Where are you?" Octavia demanded without greeting. "Jennifer called me hysterical, saying you delivered Donald's baby with another woman and then vanished. And nobody can find you, and I swear to God, if you're doing something reckless, I will resurrect you just to kill you. Myself. I'm home," Samantha said, her voice eerily calm even to her own ears, going through Donald's laptop. Did you know he's been systematically stealing from our joint account for 6 years? I'm looking at documentation showing 240,000 in theft. It's actually quite impressive from an organizational standpoint. The level of planning required to maintain two completely separate lives with independent financial infrastructures is remarkable. Stop! Octavia interrupted sharply. Stop analyzing it like a medical case and start feeling something before you fracture. I feel plenty, Samantha said, taking a long drink of wine. I feel like the most gullible woman alive. I feel like I wasted 8 years protecting the ego of a man who was spending my money on another family. I feel like setting this entire house on fire with everything in it. Don't do that. Terrible for property values, and you'd lose your half of the equity. Octavia's voice gentled slightly. I'm coming over. Don't make any decisions until I get there. Bring more wine, Samantha said. I'm going to need significantly more wine. Octavia arrived within 45 minutes, letting herself in with the spare key. She found Samantha still in Donald's office, now surrounded by printed bank statements and photographs spread across the floor like crime scene evidence. The printer was still churning out documentation, page after damning page. Jesus Christ, Octavia breathed, surveying the scope of the betrayal. This is beyond affair territory. This is organized fraud. It's methodical, Samantha corrected, pointing to a particularly detailed spreadsheet displayed on the laptop. Look at this budget. He created line items for his double life. Rent for her apartment, groceries for their household, entertainment expenses, utilities, car insurance. He even started a baby fund 8 months ago when he found out she was pregnant. He knew about the pregnancy and continued lying to my face every single day while planning for his secret child. Octavia knelt beside her friend, studying her face with growing concern. Samantha's expression was too calm, too controlled. The kind of eerie composure that preceded either complete breakdown or something far more dangerous. Sam, look at me. Octavia waited until Samantha met her eyes. What are you feeling right now? Real talk. Samantha set down her wine glass with careful precision. When she spoke, her voice was soft and deadly serious. I want him destroyed. Not just hurt, not just upset. I want his entire life dismantled piece by piece until he understands exactly what he took from me. I want him to lose everything the way I lost everything. I want his lies to cost him so catastrophically that he spends the rest of his pathetic existence regretting that he ever thought he could betray me. Good, Octavia said firmly. That's the healthiest thing I've heard all night. Rage is appropriate. Destruction is warranted. Now let me help you do it legally instead of literally, because you're too smart for prison orange. They worked through the night like soldiers preparing for war. Octavia brought her laptop and external drives, systematically copying every file from Donald's computer. Bank records, emails, photos, spreadsheets, text message backups pulled from his cloud storage. She photographed documents with her phone, created organized folders with dates and categories, built a case that would eviscerate Donald in any courtroom. This is exceptional, Octavia muttered, scrolling through financial records. I've handled dozens of infidelity cases, and this is the most elaborate deception I've encountered. He didn't just cheat. He committed fraud, theft, possibly forgery, depending on what he told Bridget. This is prosecutable beyond divorce court. I don't want him prosecuted, Samantha said. I want him humiliated. Why not both? Dawn was breaking when Samantha's phone exploded with incoming messages. Donald had finally made it home from the hospital. The texts were a progression of panic, starting with desperate apologies and escalating into increasingly unhinged explanations. I'm so sorry, Sam, please. Pick up, I can explain everything. It's not what you think, I swear. She doesn't mean what you mean to me. I made mistakes, I'm weak. I'm stupid, but I love you, please. Believe me. Sam, answer your phone, please. I'm begging you, we need to talk. Where are you? I'm home and all your things are here, but you're not answering and I'm losing my mind. Samantha read through them with detached interest, the way she might read symptoms in a patient chart. He says he loves me. He says Bridget doesn't mean what I mean to him. He says it was all a mistake. Block him, Octavia suggested, but Samantha shook her head slowly. No, I want to see every pathetic attempt at justification. I want to watch him scramble. I want documentation of his lies for court. She looked at Octavia with something calculating and cold in her expression. How quickly could you file divorce papers? I could have them drafted and ready to file within 2 days. Good, but don't file yet. Samantha stood, stretching muscles that had been cramped for hours. I want to handle this strategically. I want him to think he's getting away with it. I want him comfortable and complacent before I take everything. What are you planning? Samantha smiled, and the expression was absolutely chilling. I'm going to let him believe I'm the understanding wife who forgives and forgets. I'm going to play the role so perfectly he'll think the worst is over. And then, when he's relaxed and believing he's escaped consequences, I'm going to dismantle his entire existence so thoroughly he'll wish I'd just screamed at him and left. Octavia stared at her friend for a long moment, before laughing with genuine delight. You terrifying, brilliant woman. I'm almost sorry for him. Don't be, Samantha said, pouring them both fresh coffee as sunrise painted the windows gold. He made every single choice that led here. He planned and executed and maintained this betrayal for 6 years. Now he gets to experience exactly how it feels when someone you trust destroys you systematically. I'm just giving him what he deserves. You'll need evidence of everything, witnesses, documentation beyond what we have. I'll get it, Samantha said with absolute certainty. I'm a diagnostician. I solve puzzles for a living. This is just another mystery that needs proper investigation. And Donald has no idea what's coming. They cleaned up the office carefully, putting everything back exactly as it had been, so Donald wouldn't know she'd been there. Samantha showered and changed clothes, transforming back into the professional physician with perfect composure. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone new staring back. Not the naive wife who'd believed in honesty and partnership. Someone harder, sharper, someone who understood that surviving meant fighting, and fighting meant being willing to destroy what tried to destroy you. Are you okay? Octavia asked, watching her friend's transformation with concern. Not even remotely, Samantha admitted. But I will be, once this is finished, and Donald is living with consequences he can't escape. I'll be better than okay. I'll be free. She left for the hospital while Donald was still sending messages begging her to come home. She had patients to see, cases to solve, a career to maintain while planning her husband's complete destruction. Multitasking had always been her strength. This was just another form of it. Revenge, Samantha had learned, required patience and precision. Donald had spent 6 years building his house of lies. She would spend however long it took to burn it down completely, leaving him standing in the ashes, wondering how he'd lost everything. The war had begun, and Samantha Grant had never lost a fight in her life. Chapter 3. The Queen Moves Her Pieces. Donald came home 3 days later looking like a man who had aged a decade. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, his clothes rumpled, his usual careful grooming abandoned in favor of unwashed hair and visible stubble. He found Samantha in the kitchen making breakfast, eggs scrambling in a pan, coffee brewing, morning light streaming through the windows like this was any ordinary morning instead of the aftermath of apocalypse. "Sam," he said, his voice cracking on her name. "Please, we need to talk." She glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral, then turned back to the stove. "Eggs? What?" He looked confused, like he'd expected screaming or violence or anything except this eerie calm. "No, I don't want eggs. I want to explain. I need you to understand." "Toast, then." She pulled bread from the cabinet, moving through the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "You should eat something." "You'd look terrible." Donald stumbled forward, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "How are you so calm? How are you not? Why aren't you yelling?" Samantha finished, sliding eggs onto a plate with precision. "Throwing things? Demanding answers?" She set the plate on the counter and finally looked at him directly, her eyes clear and assessing. Because I'm a doctor, Donald. I don't make decisions based on emotional reactions. I gather information first. He sank onto a bar stool, staring at the eggs like they might contain poison. I know you hate me. You have every right to hate me. What I did was, it was unforgivable, and I don't have any excuse except that I was weak and stupid, and I made terrible choices, and I'm so sorry. Sam, I'm so desperately sorry. The rehearsed quality of the speech was almost amusing. Samantha poured coffee, added cream exactly the way he liked it, and set it in front of him. Tell me about Bridget. It doesn't matter, he said quickly. She doesn't matter. You're my wife. You're the one I love. You're... Donald. Her voice was soft but carried an edge that made him fall silent. I asked you a question. Tell me about Bridget. He looked at her warily, clearly trying to calculate what answer might save him, what explanation might turn this disaster into something survivable. Finally, he started talking. The words tumbled out in a rush. How he met Bridget at a work conference. How it started as just conversation, then coffee, then more. How guilty he felt but couldn't seem to stop. How it spiraled into something he never intended. Samantha listened without interruption, noting every lie and omission with the same analytical precision she used for patient diagnoses. He was editing the story, making himself the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of deliberate deception. There was no mention of the 6 years, no mention of the money, no mention of telling Bridget he was divorced. When he finally ran out of confessions, she handed him a fork. Eat your eggs before they get cold. That's it? He asked, bewildered. That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say? Samantha leaned against the counter, sipping her own coffee with apparent contentment. You made mistakes. People make mistakes. The question is what happens now. Hope bloomed in his expression, desperate and pathetic. You mean you'll consider we could try to work through... Marriage is a partnership, Samantha said calmly. It's about commitment and forgiveness and understanding that nobody's perfect. She watched him grasp at these words like lifelines. Of course, it's also about honesty, about trust, about not funneling joint savings into secret accounts to fund your affair. The blood drained from his face so quickly she thought he might pass out. You went through your laptop? She smiled pleasantly. Of course I did. I'm a diagnostician, Donald. When I'm searching for answers, I'm very thorough. Liberty Bank, wasn't it? The account you opened under your middle name. The one with the rather impressive balance built from our joint savings. He stood up so fast, the bar stool toppled over behind him. I can explain that. The money was... I was going to pay it back. I swear it was just temporary. $240,000, Samantha said, her voice still that same eerie calm. That's how much you stole from our marriage. I did the calculations. Very impressive, really. The level of planning required to maintain such systematic theft over 6 years. 6 years, he repeated faintly. And how did you... Bank records, email timestamps, photo metadata. She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. You're not nearly as clever as you think you are, Donald. You're just married to someone who trusted you enough not to look. He reached for her desperately, tears streaming down his face again. Please, please, Sam, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll pay back every penny. I'll end things with Bridget completely. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. Samantha let him hold her hands. Let him sob against her shoulder. Let him believe his tears might matter. She stroked his hair gently, murmuring soothing sounds, playing the role of forgiving wife with perfect conviction. We'll figure it out, she whispered. Marriages survive worse than this. We can work through it. His relief was so profound, he actually collapsed against her, shaking with gratitude and exhaustion. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. I promise I'll make this right. I'll be better. I'll be the husband you deserve. She held him until his tears subsided, until his breathing steadied, until he pulled back with swollen eyes and a tremulous smile. Then she kissed his forehead gently, the way you might kiss a child, and stepped away. Eat your breakfast, she said. Then get some sleep. You look exhausted. He obeyed like a grateful puppy, eating mechanically while she cleaned up the kitchen. When he finally dragged himself upstairs, Samantha waited until she heard the bedroom door close before pulling out her phone. She opened her contacts and called Octavia. "File the papers," she said quietly. "And call that investigator you mentioned. I want to know everything about Donald's life that I don't already know. Every lie, every secret, every skeleton he's hiding. I'm going to dismantle him piece by piece, and I want ammunition for every single shot." "You're terrifying and I love it," Octavia said with audible satisfaction. "This is going to be the most beautiful destruction I've ever witnessed." Samantha looked at the ceiling, imagining Donald sleeping peacefully upstairs, believing he'd been forgiven, believing the worst was over. She felt nothing. No love, no anger, just cold, crystalline clarity about what came next. "He has no idea what's coming," she said softly. "And that's exactly how I want it." Chapter 4. The Empire Strikes Back. The acceptance letter from Boston Memorial Hospital arrived on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Samantha held the envelope in her hands, feeling the weight of opportunity pressed into expensive paper and formal language. Chief of Diagnostic Medicine. A position she'd applied for months ago on a whim, never really believing she'd get it. The salary alone was almost triple her current income. The prestige was unmatched. The location was perfect. The timing was absolutely devastating. She waited until that evening to open the letter properly, reading through the formal offer while Donald puttered in his study, believing himself forgiven and safe. The position started in 6 weeks. They wanted her to visit for a final interview and facility tour, but the letter made clear this was a formality. The job was hers if she wanted it. She wanted it. She wanted it with the fierce hunger of someone who had spent years making herself smaller, quieter, less ambitious for the comfort of a man who was betraying her the entire time. She wanted it like oxygen, like sunlight, like vindication. Samantha called Octavia immediately. "I got the Boston position." "No way! Sam, that's incredible." "Wait, are you going to take it?" Yes," Samantha said simply. "And I'm going to announce it at the dinner party Donald organized for this weekend." The dinner party was Donald's attempt at normalcy, a gathering of his colleagues and friends designed to prove that everything was fine, that their marriage had weathered the storm, that there was nothing to see here except a couple working through typical marital challenges. He'd spent days planning the menu and guest list, determined to re-establish their social standing. Samantha let him plan. She smiled and nodded and helped him arrange flowers. She played the devoted wife with award-worthy commitment, while secretly documenting every asset, every account, every shared possession they owned. Octavia's investigator had provided additional information that made the scope of Donald's lies even more grotesque. Bridget believed Donald was divorced. He'd shown her forged papers, created elaborate stories about custody battles and bitter ex-wives. He'd positioned himself as the victim in both relationships, the good man trapped between two difficult women. The dinner party arrived with perfect weather and 12 guests. Donald's colleagues from the marketing firm where he worked filled their dining room with loud conversation and expensive wine. His business partner Winston Graves held court at one end of the table, telling stories about successful campaigns while his wife nodded along with practiced enthusiasm. These were people who had smiled to Samantha's face while knowing about Donald's affair, while covering for his lies. While treating her like a fool behind her carefully maintained facade, she served appetizers with gracious charm. She laughed at jokes. She played hostess with the skill of someone who had perfected the role through years of practice. And then, as everyone settled into dessert, she tapped her wineglass gently to get their attention. "I have an announcement," Samantha said, her voice cutting through the conversation with surgical precision. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult for everyone, given the rather surprising developments in our marriage." She smiled at Donald, who was already looking nervous. "But I wanted to share some positive news. I've been offered the position of Chief of Diagnostic Medicine at Boston Memorial Hospital." The table went silent. Donald's fork clattered against his plate. "It's an incredible opportunity," Samantha continued brightly. "Triple my current salary, leadership position, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the country. I'll be moving there within the month." "Moving?" Donald's voice was strangled. "To Boston?" "But we live here, we have a house, we have—" "Well, I'll be moving to Boston," Samantha clarified with perfect composure. "You're welcome to join me, of course. Though given that you have a newborn son and another family to support, I imagine that might be complicated." You could have heard a pin drop. Donald's mother, Constance, who had somehow wrangled an invitation despite knowing about the scandal, made a sound like a strangled cat. Winston Graves developed a sudden fascination with his dessert plate. His wife kicked him under the table hard enough that everyone heard it. "I've actually already spoken to a realtor about listing our house," Samantha added conversationally. "The market is excellent right now. We should get well above asking price. You'll have plenty for a down payment on something that accommodates your expanded family." "Samantha," Donald said, his voice climbing with panic, "we should discuss this privately." "Why?" She tilted her head with apparent innocence. "These are our closest friends. Surely we can share our plans with people who care about us." She turned to Winston with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "You knew about Bridget, didn't you, Winston? You helped cover for Donald when he was supposedly at work conferences that were actually romantic getaways." Winston's face turned the color of spoiled meat. That's not—" "It's fine," Samantha said magnanimously. "I understand the bonds of brotherhood and loyalty. I'm sure you were just trying to be a supportive friend." She took a delicate sip of wine. "Though I do wonder what Helen thinks about you actively helping another man cheat on his wife. Helen, you must have such strong faith in your own marriage to be comfortable with that level of deception." Helen turned to her husband with murder in her eyes. The table had devolved into chaos. Constance was demanding explanations. Other guests were making excuses about early mornings and prior commitments. Donald was trying to salvage the situation by laughing it off, suggesting Samantha was tired and emotional and perhaps they should all move to the living room for coffee. Samantha stood up, every eye turning to her with the magnetic pull of impending disaster. "Thank you all for coming. It's been such a lovely evening. Donald, I'll be staying at Octavia's tonight. I've taken the liberty of changing the locks on the house effective immediately. Your clothes and personal items are packed in the garage. The divorce papers should be served at your office tomorrow morning." The silence was absolute. "What?" Donald whispered. Samantha picked up her purse from the sideboard, her movements unhurried and graceful. "Did you really think I forgave you? That those eggs and coffee meant I was going to play the understanding wife while you stole from me, lied to me, and humiliated me?" She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "I'm a doctor, Donald. I don't heal by ignoring the disease. I cut it out completely." She walked toward the door while the table erupted behind her. Donald was shouting her name, his voice ragged with desperation. Constance was crying. Winston and Helen were arguing in vicious whispers. The other guests were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Samantha paused at the door and looked back at her husband one final time. He was standing now, his face contorted with anguish, reaching for her across the length of the dining room, like that gesture might bridge the chasm he'd created. "I protected you," she said quietly. "For 8 years, I protected your pride and your ego and your fragile masculinity. I sacrificed my dreams because I thought you needed me to. And the entire time, you were building another life with money you stole from our marriage. So no, Donald, there is no forgiveness. There is no reconciliation. There is only the consequence of your choices. And trust me when I say I'm going to make sure those consequences are thorough." She left while he was still calling after her, his pleas echoing into the night, where they dissolved into nothing at all. Chapter 5. When Queens Collide. The coffee shop Samantha chose for the meeting was deliberately neutral, a quiet place near the hospital with decent espresso and booth seating that offered privacy. She arrived early, claiming a corner spot with clear views of the entrance, and waited with her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't actually drunk from. Bridget Holloway entered right on time, carrying baby Kyla in one of those complicated wrap contraptions that new mothers seem to master through instinct or desperation. She looked exhausted and weary, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Samantha. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the distance, two women connected by one man's infinite capacity for deception. Samantha raised her hand in a small wave. Bridget walked over with visible reluctance, settling into the booth with the careful movements of someone still recovering from childbirth. "Thank you for meeting me," Bridget said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," Samantha admitted. "But I realize we're both victims of the same liar, and that makes us allies, whether we want to be or not." Bridget's eyes filled with tears.
"I didn't know."
"I swear to God I didn't know he was still married. He showed me divorce papers. He told me you were cruel and cold and refused to have children with him. He said you'd driven him away with your selfishness and ambition." The words should have hurt, but Samantha felt only clinical interest in the architecture of Donald's lies. "When did you meet him?" 6 years ago at a work conference. He was charming and attentive and said all the right things. We started talking, then dating, then building a life together." Bridget's voice cracked. "He told me he'd been trying to have children with you for years, but you kept refusing. He said you thought kids would ruin your career. He made it sound like he was this heartbroken man who just wanted a family. The irony," Samantha said dryly, "is that I believed I couldn't have children with him because he was infertile. He told me his sperm count was too low. He showed me test results. He let me mourn motherhood while I protected his masculine pride." Bridget's jaw dropped. That's insane. He told me you didn't want children. He never said anything about being infertile." "Because he's not," Samantha said flatly. "He's a liar who built two separate realities and maintained them through systematic deception. You were the family he actually wanted. I was the successful wife who made him look good and funded his double life." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared betrayal settling between them like a living thing. Baby Kyla began fussing, and Bridget adjusted him automatically, her hands moving with practiced competence even while her world was clearly collapsing. "He came to see me yesterday," Bridget said quietly, "begging me to help him fix things with you, saying he'd made terrible mistakes, but his real life was with you, and I needed to disappear." He actually used the word disappear, like I'm some embarrassing problem, instead of the mother of his child. Samantha leaned forward, her voice sharp with sudden intensity. "Did he give you money?" "Regular support payments." "Some," Bridget admitted. "But he always said money was tight because of your divorce settlement. He said you were taking him for everything, that you'd frozen accounts and were being vindictive about splitting assets." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I have all the texts, all his excuses about why he couldn't afford more." "Show me," Samantha said, and for the next hour they sat in that coffee shop trading evidence like detectives piecing together a crime. Bridget showed Samantha the forged divorce documents Donald had created, complete with fake court stamps and legal language copied from actual proceedings. She showed bank statements where Donald claimed he was barely scraping by. She showed messages where he painted Samantha as an abusive, vindictive woman who was destroying him financially and emotionally. The lies were so elaborate, so detailed, so completely insane that Samantha found herself almost impressed by the sheer audacity required to maintain such extensive fabrication. "He told me you humiliated him about his low sperm count," Bridget said, scrolling through old messages, "and that you made him feel like less of a man, that you refused fertility treatments because you secretly didn't want children with someone you considered defective." "I never said anything remotely like that," Samantha said coldly. "I protected his supposed infertility like a state secret. I changed the subject when people asked about children. I made excuses to his mother about why we weren't trying treatments. I carried his shame for him while he used that same supposed shame to manipulate you into sympathy. Bridget looked at her with dawning horror. We're not enemies, are we? We're both just collateral damage in his ego project. Exactly, Samantha said. Which is why I'm going to help you file for the maximum child support payment, provide documentation of his actual income, and connect you with a lawyer who will eviscerate him legally. Why would you help me? Because Donald thought he could have everything, Samantha said simply. The successful wife, the secret family, the stolen money, the elaborate lies. He thought he was clever enough to maintain it forever. I'm going to make sure the consequences of his choices hurt exactly as much as they should, and that means ensuring both his families hold him accountable. They spent another hour coordinating their approach. Bridget shared everything she knew about Donald's finances, his habits, his patterns. Samantha shared contact information for Octavia's law firm and walked Bridget through what to expect from a paternity suit. By the time they finished, something unexpected had happened. They'd bonded over their shared destruction. You should meet my best friend, Octavia, Samantha said as they gathered their things. I think you two would get along remarkably well. She has very strong feelings about men who think they're smarter than the women they're manipulating. I'd like that, Bridget said. Then hesitantly, I'm sorry for everything. Even though I didn't know, I'm still sorry you got hurt. I'm not, Samantha said, and she meant it. If this hadn't happened, I'd still be making myself smaller for a man who didn't deserve me. Now I'm moving to Boston to run a diagnostic department and building a life where I take up all the space I want. So really, Donald did me a favor. He just doesn't know it yet. They parted with the tentative warmth of accidental allies. Samantha drove home, feeling lighter than she had in weeks, as if naming the betrayal with someone who understood it had somehow lessened its weight. Her phone buzzed with messages from Donald, increasingly frantic attempts to reach her, pathetic pleas for conversation. She deleted them without reading past the first line. That evening, curled up on Octavia's couch with wine and Chinese takeout, Samantha's phone rang from an unknown Boston number. She answered cautiously. Dr. Grant, this is Thaddeus Whitmore. We met briefly at the medical conference in Baltimore last year. Samantha sat up straighter, remembering a conversation about diagnostic innovation and a neurosurgeon with kind eyes and a thoughtful manner. Dr. Whitmore, of course. What can I do for you? I heard through the medical community that you accepted the position at Boston Memorial. I wanted to reach out and offer to show you around the city when you visit for your tour. Boston can be overwhelming if you don't know the good neighborhoods and secret coffee places. There was no agenda in his voice, no awkward flirtation, just a straightforward offer of help from one physician to another. Samantha found herself smiling genuinely for the first time in what felt like forever. I'd appreciate that, she said. Thank you. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important, weather, traffic patterns, restaurant recommendations, and when they hung up, Samantha realized she'd laughed. Actually laughed freely and without the weight of betrayal dragging her down. Octavia raised an eyebrow over her wine glass. Was that a man making you smile? Don't start, Samantha warned, but she was still smiling. It was just a colleague offering to help me get oriented to Boston. Octavia said knowingly. And does this colleague have a name? Thaddeus Whitmore. He's a neurosurgeon. Is he attractive? Samantha threw a pillow at her friend's head. I'm getting divorced, Octavia. I'm not looking for a relationship. I didn't ask if you were looking, Octavia pointed out. I asked if he was attractive. He's fine, Samantha said, trying to sound dismissive and failing. Nice eyes, good hands. Obviously intelligent based on his reputation, but that's completely irrelevant because I'm focused on destroying my current husband, moving to a new city, and rebuilding my entire life. Sure, Octavia agreed, grinning wickedly. Totally irrelevant. Just like you're totally not blushing right now. Samantha grabbed another pillow, but she was laughing as she threw it, feeling something shift in her chest. Hope maybe. Or just the recognition that Donald's betrayal had ended one chapter but hadn't destroyed the whole book? Chapter 6. Resurrection. Boston in autumn was a revelation. Samantha drove through streets lined with trees exploding in crimson and gold, past historic brownstones and modern high-rises, feeling like she'd stepped into a version of herself that had been waiting patiently for permission to exist. Her new apartment overlooked the Charles River, all floor-to-ceiling windows and natural light, nothing like the suburban cage she'd shared with Donald. Boston Memorial welcomed her like visiting royalty. The chief of staff gave her a personal tour of the diagnostic department, introducing her to physicians who knew her reputation and looked genuinely excited to work with her. They asked intelligent questions about her approach to complex cases, requested her input on current puzzles, treated her like the expert she was instead of someone who needed to dim her competence for male comfort. "Your office," the chief said, opening a door to a corner space with windows overlooking the city and enough room for both her medical books and the personal life she'd never had permission to display. "We're thrilled to have you, genuinely. The board voted unanimously for your appointment." Samantha stood in that office feeling something foreign and wonderful. Pride. Pure, uncomplicated pride in her own achievements without anyone else's ego demanding she minimize them. Thaddeus met her for coffee that afternoon, appearing in the hospital lobby with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. He was attractive in a way that snuck up on you, not flashy or obvious, but compelling in his quiet competence and genuine warmth. "Welcome to Boston," he said, shaking her hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "Ready for the tour?" They walked through the city while he pointed out landmarks and shared insider knowledge about which coffee shops had the best pastries and which neighborhoods were overpriced tourist traps. He told her about his own move to Boston after his divorce, how disorienting it felt at first and then how liberating. "My ex-wife left me for my younger brother," he said matter-of-factly as they crossed the public garden. Apparently, she decided she'd married the wrong sibling and felt entitled to correct her mistake. "Took me 2 years to stop feeling like an idiot and start recognizing I'd been set free." "How very evolved of you," Samantha said dryly. "I'm currently in the wanting my ex-husband to suffer phase. Is enlightenment mandatory, or can I stay bitter?" Thaddeus laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "Stay bitter as long as you need. Personally, I went through an extended period of drinking too much expensive whiskey and making poor decisions about recreational activities I was too old for. Everyone processes differently. What finally shifted? Honestly, time and therapy and recognizing that her choices said everything about her and nothing about me. Also, my kids staged an intervention when I showed up to Thanksgiving drunk and tried to fight my brother in front of the mashed potatoes." He smiled ruefully. "Nothing like your children lecturing you about dignity to put things in perspective." They had dinner that night at a small Italian restaurant Thaddeus recommended, tucked away in the North End where tourists never ventured. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from medicine to books, to travel dreams, to the absolute absurdity of human behavior. Thaddeus didn't ask about her divorce directly, didn't pry or push, just created space for her to share what she wanted when she was ready. "Donald fathered a child with another woman while I believed he was infertile," Samantha said over tiramisu, the words coming out simple and direct. 8 years I protected his pride. 8 years I mourned not having children. He was building an entire second family with money stolen from our joint account." Thaddeus set down his fork carefully. "That's not just betrayal. That's systematic psychological abuse." "Thank you," Samantha said quietly. "Everyone keeps saying it was an affair, a mistake, a lapse in judgment. But you're right. It was calculated and deliberate and designed to manipulate both me and the other woman. Are you okay?" "No," she said honestly, "but I'm better. Moving here helps. Starting fresh where nobody knows the story or feels sorry for me helps. Building a life where I'm the architect instead of the collateral damage helps. You're going to be extraordinary here, Thaddeus said with absolute certainty. Boston has no idea what it's gaining. Something warm unfurled in Samantha's chest, unfamiliar and tentative. Not attraction exactly, or not only attraction, but recognition. Of being seen without having to perform, of being valued without having to minimize, of being enough exactly as she was. They started having coffee weekly, then dinners, then she lost track because Thaddeus simply became part of her routine in Boston. Morning texts checking how her first complicated case went. Late evening calls after brutal shifts comparing medical disasters. Weekend walks along the harbor where they talked about everything except the people who had broken their trust. He told her about his sons, both in graduate school, both worried about their father being lonely. She told him about Octavia and Bridget, the unexpected alliance of women connected by Donald's destruction. He shared his love of terrible action movies and obscure jazz. She admitted her secret addiction to competitive cooking shows and British murder mysteries. "I'm not ready for anything," Samantha said one evening as they walked along the river, autumn giving way to winter chill. "I know we're spending time together, and there's probably some unspoken thing happening, but I need you to know I'm completely broken in the romance department." "Good thing I'm not in any rush," Thaddeus said easily. "Broken people make the best company anyway. We're more interesting than the ones who've never been shattered." That's a very convenient philosophy for someone potentially interested in a woman whose ex-husband is currently being eviscerated in divorce court. "Is he?" Thaddeus asked with interest. "How's that going?" "Spectacularly," Samantha said with satisfaction. Bridget filed for maximum child support with documentation of his actual income. My lawyer is going after every asset. His parents disowned him publicly. His business partner fired him because the scandal damaged client relationships. He's living in a studio apartment and working retail while I'm here running a diagnostic department at one of the country's best hospitals. Sounds like Consequences found the right address. Finally, Samantha agreed. They stopped at a bench overlooking the water, watching lights reflect on the dark surface while the city hummed around them. Thaddeus turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "For what it's worth, your ex-husband is an idiot. Anyone who had you and chose to blow it up for secret families and stolen money deserves every miserable moment of his current existence." "That's very partisan of you," Samantha said lightly, trying to deflect the intensity of being seen so clearly. "I'm a partisan person when it comes to brilliant women being undervalued by mediocre men," Thaddeus said simply. "It's one of my defining character traits." He kissed her that night, a soft question rather than a demand, his hand gentle on her cheek as he leaned in slowly enough that she could stop him if she wanted. She didn't want to stop him. She kissed him back and felt something crack open inside her chest. Some locked room she'd thought was permanently sealed. When they pulled apart, she was crying without meaning to, tears sliding down her face in the lamplight. "Sorry," she gasped. "I don't know why I didn't expect—" "It's okay," Thaddeus said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "Healing isn't linear. Take all the time you need." She went home to her beautiful apartment and called Octavia, needing to process what had just happened with someone who would be both supportive and ruthlessly honest. "I kissed Thaddeus," she announced without preamble. "Or he kissed me. It was mutual. And then I cried all over him like some emotional disaster, and he just held me and said, 'Healing isn't linear.'" "I love him already," Octavia declared. "When's the wedding?" "Don't be ridiculous. I'm nowhere near ready for a relationship. I'm still processing a decade of lies and betrayal. And yet you're smiling while you tell me about crying all over a kind neurosurgeon who quotes therapy concepts and doesn't pressure you for anything." Samantha realized she was, in fact, smiling. "Maybe I'm just happy to be in Boston." "Sure," Octavia said. "That's definitely what that smile is about. The excellent public transportation and historical architecture. I hate you. You love me, and you like Thaddeus. And that's okay, Sam. You're allowed to be happy even while Donald's world burns. Especially while Donald's world burns. Later, lying in bed looking at the city lights through her windows, Samantha let herself acknowledge the truth. She was falling for Thaddeus, slowly and carefully and terrified of getting hurt again, but falling nonetheless. And maybe that was okay. Maybe the best revenge against Donald wasn't just taking her power back. Maybe it was building something genuine and beautiful with someone who actually deserved her. Chapter 7. Queens wear crowns. Kings wear shame. The medical documentary film crew arrived at Boston Memorial on a grey morning in early winter. They were making a series about innovative diagnostic approaches, and Samantha had been selected as one of the featured physicians. The producer explained they wanted to capture her working on real cases, show her process, let her explain her methodology in her own words. Samantha spent 3 days with cameras following her through the hospital. They filmed her solving a case that had stumped 4 other doctors, a constellation of seemingly unrelated symptoms that she traced back to a rare autoimmune disorder. They recorded her teaching rounds with residents, her patient consultations. The moment a diagnosis clicked into place and everyone in the room understood, they were watching something special. The interview portion happened in her office. Samantha, in her white coat with Boston skyline visible through the windows behind her. The interviewer was a sharp woman named Patricia who asked intelligent questions and actually listened to the answers. You've achieved remarkable success at a relatively young point in your career, Patricia said. How do you balance such demanding work with personal life? Samantha considered the question carefully, knowing this would be seen by colleagues and strangers, by people who knew her story and people who didn't. She thought about Donald, about the years she spent making herself smaller, about the price she paid for protecting someone else's ego. I used to believe balance meant sacrificing my own ambitions so other people felt comfortable, she said slowly. I made myself less challenging, less intimidating, less visible, because I thought that's what partnership required. I was wrong. Real balance comes from surrounding yourself with people who celebrate your success instead of feeling threatened by it. People who want you to take up all the space you deserve. The interview went viral in medical circles within days of airing. Colleagues sent her messages saying they'd watched it multiple times. Young female physicians reached out thanking her for articulating what they'd felt but couldn't name. One woman wrote that she'd left a relationship after seeing the interview, recognizing she was dimming herself for someone who didn't appreciate the light. Samantha's profile grew. She was invited to speak at Johns Hopkins, at conferences across the country, on panels about women in medicine and diagnostic innovation. She delivered a keynote at a major symposium where she received a standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. Thaddeus attended that speech, sitting in the front row beaming with uncomplicated pride. And afterwards, they had dinner where he told her she was magnificent and meant it without caveat or qualification. They'd been seeing each other for months now, moving slowly but steadily toward something real. He'd introduced her to his sons during their winter break, 2 confident young men who welcomed her warmly and teased their father about smiling more than they'd seen in years. She'd met his parents, delightful retired academics who treated her like family immediately. They took weekend trips to places Samantha had never been because Donald hated travel, exploring small towns and historic sites and natural wonders with the enthusiasm of people discovering the world together. I need to tell you something, Samantha said one night over dinner at Thaddeus's brownstone. About children. He looked at her carefully, setting down his wine. Okay, I'm not going to have biological children. That ship has mostly sailed, and honestly, after everything with Donald, I've made peace with it. But I need you to know that's my situation going forward. No babies, no pregnancy, no experiencing those milestones. Okay, Thaddeus said again. Is there more? Doesn't that bother you? Sam, I'm 53 with 2 grown sons and a vasectomy I got a decade ago. I'm not looking to start over with diapers and sleepless nights. I'm looking to build a life with someone I respect and admire and want to grow old with. He reached across the table for her hand. Your value isn't determined by your reproductive capacity. You know that, right? She did know that, intellectually, but hearing him say it without hesitation or disappointment made something tight in her chest finally release. Donald made me feel broken for not being able to give him children while he was creating them with someone else. Donald was a manipulative asshole who doesn't deserve another second of your emotional energy. Thaddeus said firmly, You're brilliant and accomplished and extraordinary exactly as you are. Anyone who can't see that is blind. That night, after dinner and talking and eventually making love, with the comfortable intimacy of people who genuinely liked each other, Samantha lay in Thaddeus's bed, watching him sleep, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real and complicated hope about the future. Meanwhile, Donald's life had become a case study in consequences. Octavia kept Samantha updated with the grim satisfaction of someone who took professional pride in thorough destruction. Donald had lost his job when the affair scandal made clients uncomfortable. His parents had publicly disowned him, his father going so far as to publish a statement in their country club newsletter about moral failures and disappointment. The house sold, and after legal fees and repaying the stolen money, Donald's share barely covered security deposit on a mediocre apartment. Bridget's child support claim had been approved at maximum levels, backdated 6 months. Donald was paying nearly $2,000 monthly for a child he saw every other weekend, plus spousal support to Samantha that would continue for 3 years. He tried fighting the spousal support, claiming she made more money than him now, but Octavia had presented evidence of his theft and deception that made the judge rule in Samantha's favor with barely concealed disgust. He tried contacting you again, Octavia reported during one of their regular calls. 217 attempts across various platforms. I've documented everything for the restraining order modification. Good, Samantha said without inflection. I want him to understand that he doesn't get access to my life anymore. Not my thoughts, not my time, not my attention. He's irrelevant. He showed up in Boston, Octavia added carefully. Last week, hospital security intercepted him and escorted him away. He'd driven there trying to see you. Samantha felt a flash of old anger, quickly controlled. File for a restraining order upgrade. I want legal documentation that if he comes near me again, he goes to jail. The restraining order was approved within days. Donald signed it from his lawyer's office, reportedly crying through the entire meeting. Samantha felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, not even anger. Just vast indifference to a man who had once been the center of her world and was now barely a footnote. She was too busy living, too busy solving impossible cases and mentoring young physicians and building a reputation that was entirely her own. Too busy falling in love with a man who made her laugh and challenged her thinking and showed up consistently without drama or deception. Too busy discovering that life after betrayal could be bigger and brighter and infinitely better than anything she'd had before. One evening, Thaddeus asked her to move in with him. Not as a dramatic proposal, but a practical suggestion while they were grocery shopping, standing in the produce section, discussing the relative merits of different apple varieties. You're at my place most nights anyway, he said casually, examining a Honeycrisp. We could combine our books and our kitchen supplies and split the utilities. Plus my place has that office space you need for your research. Samantha stared at him, an apple forgotten in her hand. Are you asking me to move in with you while debating fruit? Is this the wrong setting? He looked around the produce section with apparent seriousness. Should I have done it somewhere more romantic? I'm out of practice with relationship milestones. No, she said, starting to laugh. This is perfect. This is exactly right, yes. I'll move in with you. They moved her belongings the following month, combining their lives with the easy cooperation of people who actually liked each other. Her medical texts fit on his shelves. His jazz collection mixed with her mystery novels. Sunday mornings became reading newspapers and trading sections over coffee. Evenings were cooking together, or attending symphony performances, or just existing in comfortable silence while she worked on research, and he caught up on surgical journals. It was quiet happiness, revolutionary in its simplicity. No games, no lies, no walking on eggshells or monitoring someone else's mood. Just two people choosing each other every day without conditions or caveats. Samantha's mother visited and pulled her aside to say she hadn't seen her daughter this radiant in years. Thaddeus's sons joked that their dad smiled more than they'd ever witnessed. The magic was just honesty, just being seen and valued and loved without having to dim any part of herself. Donald sent one more message through lawyers, a pathetic attempt at apology and reconciliation. Samantha read the first paragraph and threw it away. She was done giving him real estate in her mind. She had better things to focus on than the man who had wasted 8 years of her life and taught her exactly what she deserved instead. Chapter 8. The Final Reckoning. The medical conference brought Samantha back to her hometown for the first time since moving to Boston. She was the keynote speaker, invited to present on diagnostic innovation to an audience of 500 physicians from across the region. The irony of returning in triumph to the place where everyone had witnessed her marriage implode was not lost on her. Thaddeus came with her, booking a suite at the conference hotel and treating the trip like the victory lap it was. They checked in together, her hand in his, and Samantha felt the stares and whispers following them through the lobby. Former colleagues recognizing her, people who knew the story watching her walk past, with a confidence that suggested she'd not just survived, but transcended. "They're all wondering about me," Thaddeus murmured as they waited for the elevator. The mysterious new man accompanying the brilliant Dr. Grant. "Let them wonder," Samantha said, squeezing his hand. "I'm done performing for an audience." The presentation was scheduled for the final evening of the conference, giving them time to explore the city Samantha had once called home. It felt strange, walking familiar streets with new eyes, seeing the places she'd been with Donald, overlaid with memories that no longer had power to hurt her. They had lunch at a restaurant she'd loved, dinner at a new place she'd never been allowed to try because Donald claimed it was too expensive. "Does it feel weird being back?" Thaddeus asked over coffee in the hotel room the night before her presentation. "Not weird," Samantha said thoughtfully. "Just distant, like watching a movie about someone else's life. That woman who lived here and protected her husband's lies and made herself smaller feels like a stranger now." "Because you're not her anymore," Thaddeus said simply. "You're the woman who survived her destruction and built something better." The next evening, Samantha dressed with care in a tailored suit that projected authority and elegance. Thaddeus straightened his tie and told her she looked formidable, which was exactly the impression she wanted. They arrived at the ballroom where the keynote would be held, finding it packed with colleagues who'd come to hear what she had to say. The conference organizer introduced her with a lengthy recitation of credentials and achievements that made Samantha simultaneously proud and uncomfortable. She took the stage to applause, standing behind the podium with the poise of someone who had earned her place there through brilliance and survival. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I'm going to talk about diagnostic innovation tonight, but I want to start with a personal story about the moment I realized I'd been living with misdiagnosis." She told them about the hospital corridor, about hearing Donald's screams, about delivering his baby while her marriage dissolved. She didn't name him but didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew the story, or could guess it. "I'd spent 8 years believing something about my life that turned out to be a lie," Samantha continued, her voice steady and clear. "And I realize that we do this in medicine too. We accept initial findings without questioning. We make ourselves fit diagnoses that don't quite match our symptoms. We protect false conclusions because challenging them feels too disruptive. The audience was completely silent, riveted by her honesty. But the best doctors don't accept faulty diagnoses. They keep investigating. They question assumptions. They're willing to blow up initial conclusions if the evidence demands it. And the best people do the same thing with their lives. They recognize when they're living with false information, and they have the courage to pursue truth, even when it's devastating. She transitioned into her actual presentation about diagnostic approaches, but the personal introduction had set a tone that elevated the entire talk. She spoke about pattern recognition and systematic analysis, and the importance of questioning comfortable conclusions. The audience was mesmerized, asking sophisticated questions during the discussion period. Several physicians admitting they'd been challenged to think differently about their own approaches. The standing ovation lasted longer than her actual speech. Samantha stood at that podium accepting their recognition, seeing respect and admiration in faces that had once looked at her with pity, and felt the final pieces of Donald's damage heal over. Afterwards, she and Thaddeus were surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues wanting to discuss her methodology or share their own stories of surviving betrayal and rebuilding. Samantha talked with person after person, offering encouragement and advice, feeling energized rather than drained by the attention. Then she saw him. Donald stood at the edge of the crowd, looking like he'd aged a decade in the year since she'd last seen him. His clothes were cheaper, his posture defeated, his eyes hollow with the kind of exhaustion that comes from consequences finally arriving. He wasn't trying to approach her, just watching from a distance, with an expression that was equal parts regret and devastation. Thaddeus followed her gaze and tensed slightly. "Is that him?" "Yes," Samantha said quietly. "But he's nobody, just a man who destroyed his own life and is finally understanding what that means." She turned away deliberately, refocusing on the physician, asking her about complex case consultations. She didn't look at Donald again. Didn't acknowledge his presence. Didn't give him the satisfaction of mattering enough to disrupt her moment. Donald waited through the crowd, though, his desperation eventually overcoming whatever sense kept him at a distance. When the crowd finally thinned and Samantha was gathering her things to leave, he approached with shaking steps. Sam," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, just 1 minute. I need to." Thaddeus stepped smoothly between them, his presence calm but immovable. "I think you need to leave." "This doesn't concern you," Donald said, trying to look past him to Samantha. "Sam, please, I'm begging you. I know I don't deserve anything, but I need you to know how sorry." "Security," Samantha said clearly, her voice cutting through his plea without mercy. 2 hotel security guards materialized immediately, drawn by the tone of authority she'd perfected over years of managing medical crises. "This man is violating a restraining order. Please escort him from the premises." Donald's face crumpled. "I just wanted to apologize. I just needed you to know." "I don't care," Samantha said flatly, meeting his eyes for the first time in over a year. "I don't care about your apologies or your regrets or your desperate need for absolution. You're irrelevant to my life. You're a cautionary tale I tell at conferences. You're nothing." The security guards took his arms gently but firmly, and Donald went with them, because resistance would have been even more humiliating than retreat. As they led him away, he looked back one final time, searching for any hint of the woman who'd once loved him. He found only indifference colder than hatred could ever be. Samantha turned to Thaddeus and found him watching her with something like awe. "That was brutal. He earned brutal," she said simply. "Can we go get dessert? I'm starving, and there's a bakery near here that makes incredible tiramisu." They left the conference hotel hand in hand, Samantha's triumph complete and Donald's humiliation absolute. Her phone buzzed with messages from Octavia, wanting to know how the keynote went, from colleagues requesting follow-up conversations, from Bridget sending a simple text that just said, "I saw him leave. You were magnificent." She was magnificent. She'd taken the worst betrayal of her life and transformed it into strength. She'd turned loss into opportunity. She'd proven that the best revenge wasn't destruction but transcendence, becoming so successful and happy that the person who hurt you becomes an irrelevant footnote in the story of your triumph. Later, back in their hotel suite with tiramisu delivered by room service, Thaddeus pulled her close and said quietly, "I'm proud of you. Not just for tonight, but for everything. For surviving, for rebuilding, for becoming this version of yourself that takes no prisoners." "I had help," Samantha said, kissing him softly. "Good people who showed me I deserved better, including a neurosurgeon who was patient enough to wait while I figured out how to trust again." "That sounds like an exceptionally smart neurosurgeon with excellent taste." "Debatable," she teased, "but I'll keep him anyway." They flew back to Boston the next morning, leaving her hometown and all its ghosts behind. Samantha looked out the airplane window as they climbed through clouds and felt nothing but gratitude for the life waiting below. The diagnostic department she ran, the patients she helped, the partnership she'd built with someone who celebrated rather than diminished her, the future that was entirely her own. Donald was probably still in that city, still living with the consequences of his choices, still trying to figure out how he'd destroyed everything. She hoped he did figure it out eventually, not for his sake, but because understanding your own capacity for damage was the only path to avoiding repeating it. But mostly, she just hoped she never had to think about him again. Chapter 9. The Phoenix and the Ashes. The divorce finalization happened on a Tuesday morning, which felt appropriately mundane for the legal dissolution of 8 years. Samantha sat in the courtroom with Octavia beside her, watching Donald's attorney attempt to argue for a more favorable settlement with arguments that sounded desperate even to untrained ears. The judge reviewed the evidence Octavia had assembled with methodical thoroughness, her expression growing progressively more disgusted as she worked through the documentation of theft, fraud, and systematic deception. "This is among the most egregious cases of marital betrayal I've encountered," the judge said finally. Looking at Donald with unconcealed contempt, the respondent maintained a 6-year affair, fathered a child, stole significant funds from joint accounts, and created elaborate deceptions that constitute psychological abuse. The petitioner is granted 70% of all marital assets. Respondent is ordered to pay spousal support for 3 years, and this marriage is dissolved, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a finality that should have felt victorious. Instead, Samantha just felt relieved. It was over. The legal connection to Donald Simon had been severed, leaving her free to move forward without his name attached to her identity. Donald sat at his table, looking hollowed out, diminished, a shadow of the confident man she'd married. His attorney gathered papers with visible frustration, while Donald stared at the table like he might find answers in the wood grain. Samantha stood, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. "How do you feel?" Octavia asked once they were outside in autumn sunshine. "Free," Samantha said simply, "and hungry. Want to get lunch?" They celebrated with expensive sushi and sake, toasting to new beginnings and the satisfaction of consequences finding the right address. Octavia regaled her with horror stories from other cases, while Samantha checked her phone intermittently, answering messages from colleagues and coordinating with her team at the hospital. "You're different," Octavia observed, "from who you were a year ago. Lighter somehow." "I'm not carrying anyone else's shame anymore," Samantha said. "Donald spent 8 years making me responsible for his feelings, his pride, his fragile ego. Now the only person I'm responsible for is myself. It's remarkably freeing." That evening, Thaddeus took her to their favorite restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. They'd been living together for months now, their routines synchronized, their lives genuinely integrated, rather than one person accommodating the other. Thaddeus treated her success as something to celebrate rather than feel threatened by. He encouraged her to take the speaking engagements and research opportunities that came her way. He never made her feel like her ambition was a problem requiring management. "I have something for you," he said over dessert, producing a small velvet box that made Samantha's heart suddenly hammer. "Thaddeus." "Let me do this properly," he interrupted gently, opening the box to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the candlelight. "Samantha Grant, you're the most brilliant, courageous, remarkable woman I've ever known. You survived devastation and turned it into strength. You rebuilt yourself into someone extraordinary, and I would be honored, genuinely honored, if you'd let me spend whatever years we have left making you laugh and supporting your dreams and loving you the way you deserve." Samantha's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. "You're sure?" "Because I come with baggage and trust issues and a tendency to overthink everything. I'm sure," he said firmly. "I've never been more sure of anything." "Then yes," she said, laughing through tears. "Obviously yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for her hand. They kissed across the table, while other diners applauded, and Samantha felt something she'd thought was impossible after Donald. Pure, uncomplicated joy about the future. They married 6 months later, in a small ceremony on Cape Cod. Thaddeus's sons stood as best men, both genuinely thrilled about their father's happiness. Octavia served as maid of honor, giving a speech that made everyone laugh and cry in equal measure. Samantha's mother attended, radiant with relief that her daughter had found genuine love. Bridget came too, bringing young Kyler, who charmed everyone with his toddler enthusiasm. "Thank you," Bridget said quietly during the reception, "for helping me see my own worth, for showing me that Donald's destruction didn't define either of us." "You would have figured it out eventually," Samantha said generously. "I just accelerated the timeline." The ceremony was everything her first wedding hadn't been: honest, joyful, surrounded by people who actually celebrated their union instead of performing social obligations. Thaddeus's vows made her cry, promising partnership and respect and love without conditions. Her own vows promised the same, along with tolerance for his terrible action movie collection and his habit of leaving coffee cups in random locations. They honeymooned in Italy, 2 weeks of art and food and history without checking work emails or thinking about the past. They wandered through Rome and Florence and the Amalfi Coast, talking about everything and nothing, making love in hotel rooms with open windows and Mediterranean breezes. It was the kind of happiness Samantha had once thought was mythology, something that existed in movies, but not real life. Meanwhile, Donald's life had stabilized at a plateau of mediocrity that was probably worse than dramatic suffering. He'd found a job in retail management, paying enough to cover his modest apartment and court-ordered support payments, but nothing close to his former lifestyle. He saw Kyler every other weekend, trying to be a decent father to the son who existed as permanent reminder of his failures. Bridget had remarried, this time to a man who actually deserved her, and made it clear Donald's role in her life was limited to co-parenting and nothing more. His parents had eventually reconciled with him, but their relationship was formal and careful. Love existed, but trust didn't. They saw him at holidays and exchanged pleasantries, but the warmth that once defined their family had been replaced by polite distance. Donald went to therapy, not because he wanted to, but because the alternative was sliding into depression that made functioning impossible. His therapist helped him recognize patterns, understand his choices, develop tools for living with consequences that would last forever. It didn't make him feel better, it just made him functional. He saw Samantha's wedding photos on social media, posted by mutual acquaintances who either didn't realize he could see them or didn't care. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, surrounded by people who celebrated her. The man beside her looked at her with uncomplicated adoration, the kind Donald had once possessed and thrown away through arrogance and entitlement. He closed the browser and went to work his retail shift, checking inventory and managing customer complaints and accepting that this was his life now. No dramatic redemption, no romantic gesture that would fix everything. Just the long, grey consequence of betraying the best thing that ever happened to him. 3 years after the divorce, Samantha was named Chief of Medicine at Boston Memorial. She was 46, the youngest person to hold the position in the hospital's history. Her acceptance speech was everything people expected from her. Articulate, inspiring, focused on collaboration and innovation, and refusing to let other people's limitations define your potential. I dedicate this achievement to everyone who was told to make themselves smaller and decided to take up space instead, she said to thunderous applause. To the women who were underestimated and proved the doubters wrong. To everyone who survived betrayal and turned it into strength. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you built afterwards. Thaddeus sat in the audience with his sons and their girlfriends, Octavia beside them, all of them beaming with uncomplicated pride. After the ceremony, they hosted a celebration at their brownstone. The house filled with laughter and music, and people who genuinely cared about Samantha's success. She stood on the back patio, watching the party through the windows, feeling the weight of everything she'd survived and everything she'd built. Donald had taken 8 years of her life through lies and betrayal, but she'd taken back everything else. Her power, her joy, her future, herself. You okay? Thaddeus asked, joining her outside with 2 glasses of champagne. Better than okay, Samantha said, accepting her glass and leaning into his warmth. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with, doing exactly what I was meant to do. That sounds like happiness. It is, she agreed, the real kind. Built on truth instead of lies, on partnership instead of manipulation, on being celebrated instead of diminished. They clinked glasses and drank while the party continued inside, their friends and family celebrating a woman who had transformed devastation into triumph, who had proven that surviving wasn't enough when you could thrive instead. Chapter 10. Queen's Reign Eternal. Morning arrived with the kind of quiet perfection that felt earned rather than accidental. Samantha opened her eyes to find Thaddeus already awake, propped on one elbow, watching her with an expression that still made her heart skip even after years together. Creepy, she murmured, smiling despite the accusation. Watching people sleep is objectively creepy. Watching my wife sleep is romantic, he countered, kissing her forehead. It's in the marriage contract. I checked. Pretty sure the marriage contract doesn't cover stalker behavior. Agree to disagree. They moved through their morning with the synchronized ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms completely. Shower together with comfortable intimacy and stolen touches that led nowhere because they both had early surgeries. Coffee brewing while Thaddeus made his legendary scrambled eggs, and Samantha assembled fruit plates with the precision she brought to everything. Toast emerging perfectly golden, just as eggs reached ideal consistency. 2 people moving in their kitchen-like dancers who'd rehearsed this choreography until it became instinct. Department meeting today? Thaddeus asked, scanning his surgical schedule. Leadership symposium, actually. They want me to speak about building diverse medical teams. She sipped her coffee, grimacing slightly. Which means 3 hours of people asking questions they could answer themselves if they bothered thinking critically. Natati, the price of being chief of medicine. Everyone wants your wisdom. Everyone wants to avoid making actual decisions and having someone else to blame when things go sideways, she corrected, but she was smiling. How about you? 2 spinal surgeries back to back. Should be home by 7 if nothing goes catastrophically wrong. Don't jinx it. You know better than to tempt the medical gods. They dressed in comfortable silence. Her in the crisp white coat that proclaimed her authority, him in surgical scrubs that somehow looked elegant on his lean frame. At the door, he pulled her close for a proper kiss, the kind that promised continuation later and made her briefly reconsider her commitment to punctuality. "Love you," he said against her lips. "Love you more," she replied, their established ritual that never got old. "Impossible. I have empirical evidence proving my love is quantitatively superior." "Your evidence is flawed. I've peer-reviewed it." "We should conduct more experiments to establish definitive findings." "Tonight," she promised, kissing him again before reluctantly pulling away. "I'll bring wine." Boston Memorial greeted her with the organized chaos she'd come to love. Residents rushed past calling good morning without breaking stride. Nurses waved from their stations. Attending physicians stopped her for quick consultations that demonstrated their trust in her judgment. This was her kingdom, built through brilliance and determination, and every morning she walked through these doors felt like vindication. The symposium was exactly as tedious as expected. Well-meaning administrators asking how to recruit diverse candidates while simultaneously maintaining hiring practices that prioritized comfort over competence. Samantha answered with diplomatic patience, while internally composing far more honest responses about systemic barriers and the necessity of being uncomfortable during transformation. During the lunch break, her phone buzzed with a message from Bridget. "Kyler wants to know when you're visiting. He's been practicing his dinosaur facts to impress you." Samantha felt warmth bloom in her chest, that unexpected joy of connection with the child who existed because of Donald's betrayal, but had become someone she genuinely cared about. Their friendship with Bridget was one of the strangest gifts to emerge from devastation, proof that shared trauma could build unexpected bridges. "Tell him I'm free next weekend. We'll do the Science Museum and he can teach me everything about paleontology." He'll lose his mind with excitement. Also, heads up, Donald missed another support payment, 4th time in 6 months. Samantha's expression hardened. "Document it thoroughly. If it hits 5, file for enforcement through the court. He doesn't get to skip responsibilities just because they're inconvenient." They exchanged a few more messages before Samantha returned to the symposium. She thought about Donald occasionally, usually when something triggered memories of who she'd been during their marriage. That diminished woman, who made herself smaller, seemed like a character from someone else's story now, a cautionary tale about the cost of protecting people who didn't deserve protection. The afternoon brought the kind of diagnostic challenge that made her feel alive, a patient presenting with symptoms that made absolutely no sense until Samantha recognized a pattern from an obscure case study she'd read years ago. The solution clicked into place with that satisfying certainty that came from expertise meeting preparation. She walked the team through her reasoning, watching their faces illuminate with understanding, feeling the particular joy of teaching someone to see what they'd been missing. "That's brilliant," one of the residents said with genuine awe. "How did you even think to connect those symptoms?" "Practice," Samantha said simply. "And reading everything, even the weird journals nobody else bothers with. You never know when some random case from a medical journal in Helsinki becomes the key to solving something impossible." She was finishing documentation when Thaddeus appeared in her doorway, still in scrubs, but with that exhausted satisfaction that came from successful, complicated surgeries. "Both spinals went perfectly," he announced, collapsing into her visitor chair with zero grace. "I'm a genius, and also I need to lie down for approximately 17 hours. "You're 54. You shouldn't be doing back-to-back spinal surgeries." "You're right. I should retire and spend my days fishing and complaining about young people." "You hate fishing, and you like young people." "Valid points. I'll just continue being a surgical genius until my hands stop cooperating." Samantha. moved around her desk to massage his shoulders, feeling the knots slowly release under her fingers. This was partnership, taking care of each other after brutal days, showing up consistently without keeping score or expecting gratitude, just being present because that's what people who actually love each other do. "Dinner?" he asked hopefully. "That new Thai place you wanted to try?" "Perfect. Give me 20 minutes to finish here." They walked through Boston streets as evening settled, the city transforming into its nighttime version with lights and music spilling from restaurants and bars. Samantha loved this city in ways she'd never loved the suburban town where she'd lived with Donald. Boston felt like freedom, like possibility, like a place where she could be exactly who she was without apology. "You're quiet," Thaddeus observed, his hand warm in hers. "Good quiet or processing quiet?" "Grateful quiet," she said, "thinking about how different my life is now compared to 3 years ago. How much better everything is. Even with the tedious symposiums and missed support payments. Even with all of that, because I'm living authentically, instead of performing someone else's idea of who I should be. I'm making decisions based on what I want, rather than what makes someone else comfortable. I'm taking up exactly as much space as I deserve." He pulled her close as they walked, kissed her temple. "For what it's worth, watching you claim your power has been one of the great privileges of my life. You're magnificent. Keep talking like that, and we might skip dinner entirely. I'm too hungry for that. But after dinner, all bets are off." The Thai restaurant was everything they'd hoped. Excellent food, reasonable prices, atmosphere that encouraged lingering over multiple courses. They talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that comes from knowing someone deeply enough that silence is comfortable and words flow without performance. Bridget mentioned Donald's missing payments, Samantha said over pad thai. "It's becoming a pattern. What are you going to do?" "Help her file for enforcement if it continues. He doesn't get to dodge consequences because they're financially uncomfortable. He made choices. He gets to live with them." "Do you ever think about him?" Thaddeus asked carefully. "Wonder how he's doing?" Samantha considered the question honestly. "Sometimes, usually when something triggers a memory, but mostly no. He's irrelevant to my happiness. He's a mistake I survived and learned from. I hope he's figured out how to be a decent father to Kyla, because that kid deserves better than Donald's track record suggests. But beyond that, he's just someone I used to know who taught me exactly what I won't tolerate. That's healthy. That's therapy and time and building something real with someone who actually deserves me," she corrected, smiling at him across the table. "You helped me remember that good men exist, that partnerships can be genuine instead of performative. That love doesn't require me to diminish myself. I didn't do anything except show up and be honest." "Exactly. You showed me that the bare minimum of decency is actually possible. Revolutionary concept." They walked home through streets lit by old-fashioned lampposts, past brownstones and parks, and the river reflecting city lights. Samantha felt that bone-deep contentment that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly who you're supposed to be with, doing exactly what you were meant to do. Their brownstone welcomed them with familiar warmth. Home, real home, built on truth and mutual respect and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. They moved through their evening routine with practiced ease, wine on the back patio watching stars emerge, comfortable silence while she read medical journals, and he caught up on surgical literature, eventually migrating to their bedroom where conversation gave way to intimacy that was both comfortable and exciting, the paradox of long-term love done right. Later, lying tangled together in the dark, Thaddeus's fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder, Samantha thought about the journey that had led here. The devastation of Donald's betrayal, the systematic destruction of her old life, the terrifying leap into unknown possibility, the slow rebuilding of trust and identity, the discovery that surviving wasn't enough when you could thrive instead. "What are you thinking about?" Thaddeus murmured against her hair. How Donald's lie gave him temporary pleasure and permanent consequences. How my choice to leave gave me temporary pain and permanent freedom. How the best revenge isn't destruction but transcendence. Very philosophical for post-coital musings. She laughed softly. "I'm a woman of depth and complexity. You're a woman who survived hell and built heaven from the ashes. Slight difference. Same thing, really." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other in the home they'd built together. Two people who'd been broken by other people's cruelty and found each other in the aftermath. Proof that surviving wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a better one. Morning came again with that same quiet perfection. Samantha woke before her alarm, watching light creep across their ceiling, feeling Thaddeus's steady breathing against her back. Her life was full. Her career was thriving. Her marriage was genuine. She'd taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into fuel for becoming exactly who she was always meant to be. Donald existed somewhere in this same world, living with consequences that would shadow him forever. She hoped he'd found some peace, some understanding of the destruction he'd caused. But mostly, she hoped she never had to think about him again, because that was the ultimate victory. Not making him suffer, not getting revenge, just building something so authentic and satisfying that he became completely irrelevant to her joy. She'd reclaimed her power by refusing to let his betrayal define her future. She'd won by becoming more than he'd ever allowed her to be. Thaddeus stirred beside her, pulling her closer in his sleep, and Samantha smiled into the morning light. This was happiness, real, hard-won, built-on-truth happiness. She'd survived the fire and emerged tempered into something stronger than she'd been before. Donald's infertility lie had given him a secret family and the total destruction of both relationships. Samantha's truth gave her everything that actually mattered. A career she dominated, a partner who celebrated her, the absolute certainty that she was the architect of her own magnificent life. She didn't just survive his betrayal. She rose from those ashes like a queen reclaiming her throne, leaving him to live forever with the knowledge of what he destroyed. And knowing that she'd not only survived but flourished was the sweetest victory of all. The end